Thank you all for coming. I think we've got a great presentation for you. I mean, if you like history and want to find out about all the cool stuff that's happening near the new hospital. My name is Kevin DeRocher. I'm president of the Sandwich South Historical Society. I've been president since 2020. In that time, we've done a lot of work with our center. We've scanned thousands of pages of documents. And with those documents, we created a website. We put all the documents on the website, free for everyone to look at. And that, I guess, indirectly led us to tonight, as Holly will explain later. Another thing we've done, we built a family tree for Sandwich South, and this goes back to from the 1871 census right through the 1931 census, so we've got about 4,400 names connected on our family tree. That can all be found from our website, and if you get one of these pamphlets, it has our website information on it. So you'll be able to get all the information you need from there. One of the things we do, we're community organizations and we run many community events. We just had an event recently about a month ago about a hockey reunion. We've done many things like this in the past. Just things bringing the community together, not so much for the history, the artifacts, but bringing the people together. And that's been a very good thing for our group. We've generated a lot of interest in our community for that. So that's something we're going to continue to do. And in that light, we're always looking for volunteers to help us run these events. So if anyone's looking to volunteer in any capacity at all, whether it be running meetings, or not running meetings, but coming to meetings, helping run the events, doing some online work, whether it be research, building the family tree, we're always looking for help for that. And since we are a volunteer organization, we rely on donations to help keep us afloat, to pay our expenses. And I can see by the bin outside you guys have been very generous, and I'm very thankful for that. Okay, about the presentation today, this is about 6 months ago, 8 months ago, I saw an initial presentation, and it was just jaw-dropping to me because there was so many cool things that I didn't know about this piece of property where the hospital is. Well, I've been informed that a lot of new things have been discovered since then, so much of what we're going to see tonight is going to be new to me as well. So there's a lot of things, and the research is going to continue. It's an ongoing process, and Holly will explain all of that. So I will introduce Holly Martelle. She's the president of TMAC, which is the architectural company, or archaeological company, and she's done. Her company has done the work, the excavation at the hospital, and has uncovered numerous things. You've seen some of the artifacts here. But there's also 6 books on the table which represent a list of all the artifacts they found, thousands and thousands. So they detailed everything that they found and have archived it. So with that, I will let Holly come up and give the presentation.
Thanks, Kevin. So believe it or not, we're just starting this whole process. It feels like we're just starting to learn everything about the people who were once associated with that property. What I want to thank Kevin. You'll see my title slide tonight says, it acknowledges my co-presenter Elise and myself, but it also says colleagues and friends, because I don't think, and I'll explain in a minute, but I think the South Sandwich Historical Society is also a primary author on this presentation tonight, whether you know it or not, because many of the resources that we use to kind of start our research on this property came from the South Sandwich Historical Society website. So really appreciate the efforts of the Society. Happy to be back here and to share some information with you and kind of rekindle our relationship, and let's see where we can take it from here. So with that, I'm going to get started tonight. Elise and I are going to do a little bit of a tag team approach, and she is going to kind of join me and tell her stories and share information when she wants to come in and share that. So I'll get started. And if at any time you can't see the screen, just please feel free to come and move closer. Okay. In 2024, and as part of planning for the new hospital site, TMHC Inc. had the extreme privilege of undertaking archaeological excavations on an unassuming farm field in South Sandwich, which, as it turns out, is in fact a historically significant and sacred place where early Black, Irish, and Scottish families experienced life together, supported each other, and created long-enduring social bonds that often transcended race, ethnicity, gender, and religious boundaries. The archaeological work unearthed not just artifacts, but a myriad of stories about the early residents of the community of Bethel, some of which are still alive in family and community memory today. Threads of memory, artifacts, and documents are being stitched together like a patchwork quilt to tell the incredible and multi-layered history of a property that links intimately to larger histories of the Underground Railroad and the development of the Methodist Church in this area. Our goal today is to share some early archaeological findings, noting how they have been informed by oral histories and community knowledge, including that so excellently compiled by your society, and also how archaeology in return is enriching and affirming local history and family stories passed down through generations. I want to start with acknowledging my co-presenters, or co-authors, if you will, recognizing that while I may be the one assuming most of the speaking responsibilities tonight, these stories have been told, remembered, and researched by so many others, including the Society and many of you in the room here this evening. I'm just sewing them together. A real source of inspiration for me has been my co-presenter this evening, Elise Harding-Davis. Well before we put shovels in the ground, the research revealed that the properties linked to the Smith family, Black pioneers buried in the cemetery on Banwell Road. We immediately reached out to Elise, who was instrumental in having that cemetery acknowledged, restored, and protected, which was just a small part of her lifelong dedication to preserving the sacred burying places of early African Canadian communities in Windsor, Essex. As a descendant of freedom seekers in this area, connecting to this property and its early Black settler families, Elise brings a really rich and personal perspective to the stories we are telling tonight. I'd like to pass it over to her to introduce herself now and share her thoughts.
Thank you, Holly. Good evening, everyone. Holly talked me up pretty big. I don't know if I can live up to that. Our first connect to each other was regarding a book that I had written, which I'm going to donate to the Society. The last slide showed the different African Canadian heritage cemeteries. There were 13 at that point that I had protected and designated. It is my lifelong passion, a driven passion, to document and preserve and educate about African Canadian history. And when Holly called me to discuss this hospital property, I said, oh yeah, I know where that's at. And you know, there was this family and that family. And she says, yes, indeed, there was. And we're going to be doing an archaeological dig on the Smith family and maybe the Payne family. And I was so excited, I could hardly stand still. You know, as a little girl, my grandfather took me to some of these different cemetery sites and to visit some of these families, specifically looking for us. Well, now I'm sharing us with everyone in our combined community because of her. So I'll let you come back.
I'd also like to give a tremendous shout out to the Amherstburg Freedom Museum and the Essex County Black Historical Research Society, who have also become wonderful partners in our endeavor. The museum provided us some photographs alongside a temporary lab space to wash and process artifacts. and they will ultimately receive our collections when we're done with them. I am also personally grateful to Jane O'Keefe and her family for sharing many of Michael's memories, and to the Ewer family, especially Ted and Arlene, who are here tonight, who shared some information and pointed me in some good directions early on, including providing me a copy of Stuart Quick's great work on the Little Family, which is also available on the South Sandwich website. So with that, I'll tell you a bit about myself and my amazing team at TMHC. I am Holly Martelle, a founder and current owner of the company. My passion is doing exactly what I'm doing tonight, sharing stories with communities whose heritage we excavate. Barbara Johnson is here tonight as well. She was involved in the fieldwork and artifact processing and is currently helping Elise and I on the research. Amanda Parks was the lead archaeologist on the project, and we had a really great team of archaeologists from Windsor and area who participated, Indigenous community representatives, alongside staff from our London office who contributed in a variety of ways. Some of their work is displayed in my slides tonight. Archaeology is just one thing we do at TMHC, and our work often gets done as part of various planning approvals for new land development projects. Highways, roads, hydro corridors, subdivisions, and in this case, a new hospital. Currently, archaeological assessments are undertaken in a 4-stage process that includes background and research, an in-the-field search for sites, testing and evaluation of any archaeological sites that are found, followed by full excavation or long-term protection in place. Our work also involves the engagement of Indigenous and descendant communities and their participation in any number of ways, from fieldwork to historical collaboration and knowledge sharing, and public dissemination of findings, as with the presentation today. TMHC had been brought in by the province on behalf of Windsor Regional Hospital partway through the archaeological process. Before we began, 4 archaeological sites had already been found on the property by another firm, and all had been described as Euro-Canadian, dated to the 19th century, and identified as domestic occupations, meaning that they likely represented early farmsteads. But as we began digging into historic records and looking more closely at some of the initial artifacts collected, we realized that this was not the full picture. The large site in the middle of the 3 aligned to the 9th concession was most certainly the farmstead of generations of the Hearst and Little families, early Irish Methodist settlers in East Sandwich. However, the smallest and most northerly of the sites produced artifacts that didn't reflect a farm at all. It was definitely something not domestic, and this was confirmed by a census record that identified a Methodist meeting house on the Hearst farm. The most southerly of the sites was not Euro, but instead African-Canadian, associated with the Smith family, one of 4 Black families who purchased land on Lot 17, Concession 9, from the Refugee Home Society, an organization that assisted the settlement of freedom seeker families in Windsor, Essex. The tremendous historical significance of the Smith farm was immediately revealed, as very few Black settler farms have been recognized in all of Ontario. It is a sad reality that even in a Black Mecca like Windsor, Essex, Black settler archaeological sites are often viewed with a white lens and misattributed to Europeans due to the nearly identical materials that are left behind. Together, these 3 sites represent a small but significant slice of the rural community of Bethel and contribute much to the history of that settlement, its early families, and the house of worship that would become the Bethel Methodist and later Bethel United Church. Archaeology can be a very powerful tool for learning about the past. Sometimes the mere act of doing archaeological work is a means of activating public memory about an unrecognized, little known, or buried past. But artifacts and archaeological data can add tangible physical details to existing histories and begin to tell new stories. Archaeology works best when different pieces of historical information are brought together, from photographs to land and archival records alongside newspaper accounts. It is most effective and rewarding when combined with oral history, family and descendant memories, those things that add life to the material remnants that were left behind. That's why we are so appreciative of Elise's insights, the information that all of the families have provided to us, and this opportunity to speak with you all and get your thoughts. To start with an orientation, the hospital parcel is located on the south side of County Road 42, which is now Cabana Road, east of the 9th concession, a property that many of you may associate with Lafferty's seasonal sweet corn and produce stand. But we respectfully acknowledge that these lands are also the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Nishnawbe, Ishkotawan, and Ishtabeg, the Three Fires Confederacy, namely the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, and falls within the traditional territories of these and Wendat, Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee peoples, who today are caretakers of this land. As these peoples move softly on the land since time immemorial with the highest regard for Mother Earth, they left behind traces for TMHC archaeologists to find in the long distant future. After the British signed treaties and began clearing and surveying the land, the hospital property became a 60-acre parcel that crossed Lot 17 and 18 of Concession 9 of East Sandwich Township in the general area referred to in the earliest documents as the Irish Settlement and later the Hearst Settlement. The immediate neighborhood would come to be known as Bethel after the church erected at the crossroads of the 9th and Baseline Road. Both lots on Concession 9 have a fascinating history, and I could talk forever about both of them. But I know you are all very eager to hear about the property's Black history, so we'll start with Lot 17, the southernmost part of the hospital site. The history of Lot 17 is significant on a local, provincial, and national, if not international scale, as it was one of several parcels and thousands of acres of land purchased in Windsor, Essex by the Refugee Home Society to support the settlement of Black freedom seekers and their families who had escaped to Canada to start a new life. The Society's efforts saw the coordinated work of a Canadian arm that included Black newspaperman Henry Bibb, George Williams, and Josiah Henson, co-founder of the British American Institute at Dawn, alongside white businessmen and abolitionists based in Detroit. As the Society was self-funded and relied on charitable donations, it may not have been a coincidence that they purchased the Lot 17 lands in 1852 from James Dougal, prominent Windsor merchant and first mayor, whose firm Dougal and Redpath had been suffering financially by 1847 and lost major assets in the 1849 fire in the downtown. Dougal was likely encouraged to liquidate his land holdings at a reasonable price and sold the 200 acres of Lot 17 to the Society by indenture, with a document signed by Detroit businessmen and Society trustees Horace Halleck, treasurer, and lawyer Edward C. Walker, who served as auditor. Society secretary Henry Bibb signed as witness. It is in an article in Bibb's newspaper, The Voice of the Fugitive, that tells us that plans for the purchase of the lot on the 9th concession were actually in place even before the formation of the Refugee Home Society, as part of the vision for the predecessor Colored Industrial Society as the sandwich mission of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, or AME Church. After purchasing lands, the Refugee Home Society subdivided larger parcels into smaller farms that were sold to Black freedom seeker families at cost, with payments made over time. The sales were accompanied by rules of behavior and settlement duties outlined in the Society's constitution, which also included a clause that stipulated the Society must be dissolved following the cessation of slavery in the United States. In accordance with Article 12 of the Society's Constitution, Lot 17 was divided into 25-acre parcels. Those on the west side along the 9th concession were sold to Black settlers, beginning with a sale to Alfred Thomas in 1857, then to Washington Smith in 1862, and Lewis Payne in 1863, and lastly to Edwin Howard in 1865. Following emancipation in the U.S., the society sold the land parcels on the east side, on the 10th, to white settlers. We have a few details about the male heads of household for each of these early Black families. Alfred Thomas declared that he was born in Kentucky in 1835 and made his way to Canada sometime before 1852 when he purchased the land on the 9th. He married Mary Carter in 1863 in the British Methodist Episcopal Church in what is now Windsor, where he lived in the Black neighborhood on McDougall Street. There he ran a small grocery and owned multiple properties. He likely didn't live on Lot 17, but rented the land to another Black farmer, Alfred Williams, who also owned land in West Sandwich. After Alfred Thomas passed away in 1867, his farm was bought by Scotsman Peter Logan, husband of Hannah Ewer, whose brother David lived across the road. It was later bought by Michael O'Keefe and Catherine Battersby, who passed it down to their son Raymond, and then it went to Raymond's son Michael and his wife Mary Jane. Edwin Howard owned multiple farms in Sandwich and Maidstone, and was a remarkable man. He didn't live on his Lot 17 property and is better known for his farm and produce truck at Tecumseh Road and Howard Avenue, which bears his name. As described in his obituary, Edwin was born in Maryland to parents who had been formerly enslaved and who had bought their own freedom. He came to Canada around 1855 and lived on Banwell Road with the Walls family for some time. He would go on to earn major municipal contracts in Windsor, run a milk business, be a community advocate, and would be described upon his passing in 1924 as one of the best known men in the city and a man always held in high esteem. His farm was purchased by Lewis Payne and is now part of the O'Keefe lands. Edwin Howard held his 9th concession land for 2 years and then sold to Lewis and Parmelia Payne, who assembled one of the largest and most successful farms in the area. Research is ongoing, but we know that Lewis Payne claimed to have been born into enslavement in Kentucky around 1818. However, it was from Georgia where he, Parmelia, and his children began their flight to freedom in Canada around 1847. Middle daughter Louisa would lose both of her parents, but gain a stern determination to continue operating her family's farm for another 35 years. For some time, her relative John Wilson helped with farm labor, but after his passing in 1925, and with ingenuity, hard work, and using her social connections, she was able to continue on her own and lived a very long life there. She would leverage her desirable farmland to negotiate with Raymond and John O'Keefe to pay out her mortgages in exchange for the deed to the farm after her passing. The prominence of Louisa within the community and its love for her are reflected in many surviving memories, tributes to her, and photographs which represent some of the only surviving images of any of these early Black farms and families. One of my favorites is that of Louisa posing after picking apples, with the image framed to show an overview of what I think might be the O'Keefe farm. Today, the last standing trees around the Payne family house and orchard are still evident south of the O'Keefe family residence. Both the Payne and Smith farms were some of the longest operated Black farms in the area, and we want to point out that by 1866 there were at least 55 Black families and farms in this part of the township. In fact, as we've been digging into the Irish and Scottish families with direct ties to the hospital site, we've found that many of their farms also had connections to Black settlers. For example, Virginia-born Black farmer Lester M. Smith held 100 acres on lots 17 and 18 Concession 8, one of the largest farms in this area, which he operated on his own, a truly remarkable accomplishment. Without heirs, and when Lester got too old to farm, he negotiated a deal with David and William
Ewer to receive his lands after his passing in exchange for a payout of the farm's existing mortgages. Also, when John and Mary O'Keefe came to Canada from Ireland ahead of the famine, they bought the 100-acre founding family farm north of the highway on lot 118, concession 3 of McNiss survey, then sold the north half to William Baker, a Black Methodist refugee who later settled with his family and his wife Mary along Banwell Road. Many of the early O'Keefe farms fell squarely between two major clusters of Black farms on the 3rd concession, one around the 8th concession and another along Banwell Road. Along Banwell Road today, you'll see the plaque commemorating the early Black settlement on Colored Industrial Society lands and the former African Methodist Episcopal Church cemetery, where the adult children of Washington and Amanda Smith were laid to rest. Many of the early Black settlers in this area were Methodists and are likely buried here as well. Washington himself became a British Methodist Episcopal Church trustee in 1877.
You want me to come up now?
The Smith family farm, just down County Road 42 from the cemetery, was in operation between 1862 and 1919 and was the home of Washington and Amanda Smith and their 11 children. A good deal of research on the Smith family was done by Elise and Natasha Henry Dixon in relation to the Smith Cemetery commemoration and the plaque, and is shared here tonight. Washington Smith reported that he was born in Jamestown, Virginia, and arrived in Canada around 1847. An 1861 census and 1862 tax assessment identifies him as an Episcopalian laborer living in a house he rented from Alfred Thomas, located on Windsor's McDougall Street. At that time, he was married to his first and much younger wife, Catherine, who had 2 young children with her, Sophia and Catherine A. Not long after the 1861 census was taken, Catherine passed away, and now responsible for 2 very young children, Washington would remarry shortly thereafter to his second wife, Amanda Stewart, daughter of George and Lively Stewart. They were married in a BME church service witnessed by their friend and landlord, Alfred Thomas. A month later, they purchased 25 acres of land from the Refugee Society on Lot 17, where Alfred Thomas too owned land, but also not far from Amanda's parents' farm on the 10th concession. Washington and Amanda would have 9 children together, 5 boys and 4 girls. One can only imagine how challenging and laborsome the early days on the farm might have been. Clearing the land, breaking up and tilling some of the hardest clay in Ontario. Some people might be able to, to understand that in this room. And building barns in a house big enough for a growing family of ultimately 13. But the Smiths had done well. Land records indicate they paid $85 for the farm, which was a significant sum at that time, which was to be paid out over an 8-year term. Yet they managed to pay the full amount in only 5. Of the archaeological remnants left behind are small sherds of pottery dating to the mid-1800s, bearing colored patterns on everyday dishes on whiteware and fancier and more expensive tea sets on porcelain. Records indicate that the family lived in a 2-story wood-framed house with 8 rooms, a very sizable residence for that time. As this was an era long before electricity, we also have evidence of the oil lamps, which are shown in one of the images in the corner there, that would have lit up the house during the evenings when the family gathered around to read, play games, share stories, and the day's events, and play music together. From the stains left in the ground and observed during the archaeological work, we can get a glimpse into what the Smith house might have looked like, which is important given no photographs have been found to date. By comparing to known examples of 19th century houses, we have some preliminary thoughts about its organization. The house covers an estimated 10 by 14 meter footprint, although it could have been smaller to start and expanded as the family grew. Support posts out front may indicate the presence of a covered porch, like in the photo in the upper right, with the two smaller posts beyond those representing a set of steps or stoop at the front door, like the photo in the bottom right. A main room on the first floor appears evident, alongside two post configurations that may relate to side and rear extensions, the latter possibly representing a storage area or a summer kitchen. There is no evidence of a basement. Behind the house was a fenced yard containing a stone-lined well, which was one of the highlights of our excavation. And here it is. The thought of the family digging a well in tremendously hard-packed clay shuddered our strong-armed excavation crews, whose bodies ached after spending months digging the archaeological features and screening that unbearably heavy soil. Luckily, we get a more vibrant and complete picture of how active and successful the Smith farm was in the form of the 1871 agricultural census, which provides vivid details. What has been fun for us is to match the details with our artifacts and other archaeological findings. By 1871, the 25-acre farm included 12 acres in pasture, an acre of vegetable gardens and an orchard, a house, and 2 barns or stables to store a variety of agricultural implements, including 4 plows alongside wagons and sleds. The piece of the sleigh bell we recovered, which we've brought with us tonight, helps us reconnect to this inventory and remind us of what it would have been like for the Smiths to travel during those cold winter months. We can use the details of the 1871 census to think about the settlement pattern we observed in the archaeological excavation. Just in from the road was the house, which sat south of the laneway, leading into the farm to the rear. The laneway was flanked by a fence line, likely defining the southern extent of the pasture, with 2 rectangular outlines of posts north of the laneway, likely representing the barns and stables. Also within the farmyard are the outlines of what were likely small outbuildings, maybe an ice house or a chicken coop, for example, and further beyond those, an L-shaped outline, potentially a corn crib. More comparison with archaeological and historically documented farmsteads, including century farms, might help us nail down these details even further. Notable features throughout the farm were long trenches which appear to be drainage ditches that would have helped take water away from the house and barns. After experiencing the summer's torrential rains, we have had first-hand appreciation for the importance of managing water flow across such poorly draining soil, and it is clear that the Smiths were actively making improvements to protect their farmstead from flooding. Some of these drains empty into or flow out of a large pit feature adjacent to the barns that we've tentatively identified as the family's privy or outhouse. The 1971 census also speaks to the crops produced on the farm, noting wheat, corn, potatoes, beets, hay, hops, tobacco, and a variety of fruits. Small seeds from these and other plants have been recovered from some of the soil samples extracted during our work, rounding out the inventory of fruits and vegetables that might have been grown in their gardens and orchard or obtained from neighbors and local markets. Among the details in the census were inventories of larger animals on the farm, including horses, sheep, and pigs. We were really excited to uncover the remains of one of the family's horses, complete with 3 of its shoes. Analysis by one of our animal bone experts revealed that it was an elderly horse, which could mean that it spent many, many years with the Smiths. That it was a cherished farm animal could also be reflected in the fact that it received a formal burial on the farm. We also uncovered the incomplete remains of a pig at the far end of the farmyard, but evidence of butchering suggests this was not a burial, but instead the pig was likely cooked whole, consumed on a special occasion, and formally disposed of. Looking back on the 1871 inventory, it is clear that the Smiths established a very active and successful farm within less than a decade of its purchase. What we find even more remarkable about that is the fact that it was accomplished before their children were old enough to help with much of the heavy farm labor. Washington's eldest child, Sophia, was only 13 in 1871. and the couple's oldest two sons, John and George, were only 5 and 3 by that time. It seems likely that Washington received help from his neighbors and the wider Black community in operating the farm, noting too that Amanda was tending to 4 children, 5 years and younger by the time of this census. We did recover several artifacts that are reminders of the early lives of the Smith children, multiple porcelain dolls and doll parts, and writing slates marked with lines and likely used as the children were learning to read and write. Remnants of several harmonicas and an accordion were also recovered from various pit features excavated near the Smith house, giving us a sense of the importance of music to the family and how they filled their rare moments of time away from everyday duties on the farm. By the early 1880s, Washington's 2 eldest daughters had left the farm. In 1884, Amanda passed away at the age of 45 after giving birth to 9 children in the span of 17 years. Eldest daughter Phoebe or Edna would have certainly become the woman of the house, helping to care for her younger siblings, especially Victoria, who was only 2 years old when her mother died. John and George were now old enough to help with the physical farm labor, which was particularly crucial as Washington was aging. Many of the artifacts we recovered from the farm site are indicative of that period, including some of the white clay smoking pipes and white finished ironstone tablewares, representing a very common, generally inexpensive and durable ceramic. Washington may have been trying to manage the increasing financial and physical challenges of operating the farm and raising his family alone and as he aged, as may be reflected in multiple mortgages he took out on the farm in the late 1800s, which helped him manage until his sons were old enough to take over. By the time of the 1891 census, widower Washington was living on the farm with 9 of his children, who ranged in age from 22 to 8 years old. A careful examination of tax records indicates that at least some of his mortgages may have also helped support significant improvements to the farm, the value of which doubled between 1889 and 1894, suggesting that a new house or barns had been built as the overall size of the farm did not increase from the original 25 acres. It was common for early farmers to make such a financial investment in their farms once the farms had been significantly cleared and were in full cultivation, realizing a certain level of success and sustainability. Around the same time, and as the second generation of their families took over their farms, the O'Keeffes, Hearsts, and others were making similar investments in mortgages to finance their farm improvements as well. In 1895, and at the age of 67, Washington passed the torch and transferred the deed to the newly improved farm to his son, George. That the deed was transferred to George made sense, as the other Smith children had moved away from the farm by the time of the 1901 census. At 28 years old, George remained to care for his aging father. Washington was a proudful man, and the thought of moving out of the only home he had ever owned and one he built for his family in freedom was likely a strong emotional reason to will him to live out his life there. Several artifacts recovered from the site help us think about Washington's last years. These include several bottles that likely held tonics and medicines that Washington may have used to help ease the aches and pains brought about by a life of intense and prolonged physical labor that began when he was born into enslavement in Virginia. In this respect, we also noted an overwhelming amount of elderberry seeds and soil samples we collected. While elderberry was used to make jam and a flavorful wine, it also has potent healing qualities. Indigenous and early settler families used elderberry in tonics and ointments for rheumatism and arthritis, and it is still used in naturopathic medicine today. After close to 2 decades away from the farm, youngest son Robert Smith returned home from Detroit after the death of his wife Myrtle. Robert married his second wife Grace and took over the farm, although may have done so reluctantly, as he is reported to have been working as a waiter. Farm life may not have been for him. The 1911 census shows Robert heading a household that contained his wife Grace, Father Washington, who was now 87 years old, and brother George, alongside a farm laborer, W. Talbot, likely William.
It was. My great-grandfather.
Oddly enough, neighbor and census taker William Ewer erroneously listed the Smith men as Irish, while Talbot is described as a Negro. Washington would pass away in 1912, just a couple of years short of 90 years old. Like Lester M. Smith and later Louisa Payne, Washington Smith knew the value of his land and his investment in decades of backbreaking labor. Before he died, he had negotiated for his neighbors Michael and Catherine O'Keefe to take over his farm in exchange for funds to pay out any outstanding debts and relieve that burden for his children, who by all indications didn't envision keeping the farm. Robert Smith signed over the deed to the O'Keefes in 1919. Historic topographic maps suggest the Smith family home stood on the property for more than another 20 years. An oral history of the O'Keefe family suggests planks were salvaged from the Smith house or barn and incorporated into the roof of a shed that still stands on their farm today, as shown in this picture. Another set of compelling stories comes from the historic settlement of Lot 18, the northern portion of the hospital site, where we excavated archaeological sites associated with the Hearst Little Farm and Methodist Meeting House. Early settlers on this lot included the Hearst, Littles, and Battersbys, with the immediate community of Irish and Scottish settlers largely comprised of Methodists, notwithstanding the Catholic O'Keefes and a few others. Stuart Quick has written a history of the Little family, and several sources speak to both the Hearsts and Littles as leaders in the early Methodist community. These families may have lent their names to the Little River and the social column in the Evening Record beginning in the late 1800s. The Hearst homestead, excavated in 2024, was part of a large 50-acre farm patented to Robert Hearst Sr. and his second wife, Mary Ann Roberts, who went by Ann, in 1840, and passed along to subsequent generations until it was sold to Michael and Catherine O'Keefe in 1907, when there were no direct descendants left with an interest in taking it over. Many of the Hearst children had married members of the Little family by that time, or by the time that Robert and Ann had passed away in 1855. The west 25 acres of the farm was ultimately inherited by one of their twin sons, Robert Jr., who married Mary Ann Little, daughter of Lindsay and Catherine Little, who had come to Sandwich from Ireland by way of Ohio. After Robert Jr.'s death around 1870, Mary Ann married American Reuben Smith and continued to live on the farm. In an atypical turn of events for that time, when Mary Ann passed on, her husband Reuben did not inherit or run the farm. Instead, he left for the U.S. to live with his daughter, and the farm passed directly to a next in line in the Hearst Little lineage, Mary Ann and Robert Jr.'s daughter, Eliza Jane Hearst, or later Eliza Jane Smith, who lived there with her husband, George Beach, and their children. And Eliza's in that picture. She's the young girl there. One curious entry in the land records that will come to make more sense in a minute is that Eliza Jane granted her elderly aunt and uncle Robert and Sarah Little a 1-acre life lease on the farm in 1888. The couple had a main residence on Elmer Avenue in Windsor, where they operated a store. As the daughter of the farm founder, Robert Hearst Sr., and his wife, Mary Johnson, Sarah wished to retain part of the family farm as a retirement country home. The Hearst Little farm was not sold until after the 1-acre life lease expired, when Sarah A. Little passed away in 1905, and ultimately Michael and Catherine O'Keefe received the deed for the Hearst Little farm in 1907. After funding mortgage payments for the Beaches, to pay out the Beaches mortgages on the property many years earlier. As luck would have it, the families associated with this little microcosm of a farm are featured in the fascinating story of early Methodism in Bethel and its church. Many members of the Hearst, Little, and Ewer families had formal roles in the Methodist Church. Nicholas Hearst, youngest son of Robert and Mary Ann, became an ordained minister and preached on a circuit in Michigan. George A. and other Hearst often stood in to take the pulpit when the traveling Methodist preachers didn't make it in time for service, a common happening in rural areas at this time. The Hearst Little Farm was also significant as the home of the second generation of the house of worship that would become the Bethel Methodist Church. An 1871 census entry notes the presence of a Methodist meeting house on the farm when occupied by Mary Ann Little Hearst and Reuben Smith. This is the same early church mentioned in passing within oral and local histories in limited detail. The first house of worship is described as a log building in an unspecified location north of County Road 42, built around 1850. It was replaced in 1856 by a new wood frame church, painted red, located across from Ray Urey's farm on the 9th concession. That is, on the Hearst Little Farm. The congregation would remain at the Hearst Farm Meeting House until 1888, when a plot of land was carved out of William Urey's farm north of Baseline Road, west of 9th, and a new, larger frame church was built. The church at Baseline would become the Bethel Methodist Church, changing its name to Bethel United after the formation of the United Church of Canada in 1925. In 1981, its congregation amalgamated with that at Maidstone to become the Bethel Maidstone United Church, which still operates today. The archaeological excavation and both the research and community engagement that has come with it has been helping to fill the gap in the early church history. The uncovered settlement patterns fully delineate the Hearst Little Farmstead, along with a 1-acre parcel to the north, containing the outline of a roughly 10 by 5 meter structure, undoubtedly the meeting house, which lacked a basement and was surrounded on at least 3 sides by a fenced yard and an open space to park many of a horse and buggy. For a long time, I was convinced that the coinciding 1888 dates for the church move to Baseline and the life lease to Robert and Sarah Little was no coincidence. Believing that the land the Littles inherited was in fact what they would call, what they called their retirement home, was that of the church. Only just weeks ago, we were able to confirm my hunch when we found the original lease document identifying the parcel as the location of the former Wesleyan Methodist Church. From the archaeological work and associated research, we can now confirm where the church was, its original dimensions, and that it was eventually assumed by the Littles. However, my curiosity was further piqued by an old black and white photo of the early O'Keefe farm hanging on the wall in the back hallway of Jane O'Keefe's house. In the rear of the farm, amongst the barns, is a church-like structure, a simple wood-clad building with a single peaked roof and long side windows, in the same form as many early Methodist chapels in early Ontario. 2 of these examples on the screen, by the way, are early black churches. And I'm not saying the Hearst building was that at all. We don't yet know much about the early congregation and whether Methodist families of all backgrounds attended the meeting house, although it is a possibility that we'd like to research further.
An interesting thing during a growing desire to abolish slavery in the United States, the Wesleyan Methodist Episcopal Church was formed. And many black people, and I'm not saying that this was a black church either by any means, but many Wesleyan Methodist blacks were conductors on the Underground Railroad.
Regardless, I think this photograph is evidence that the building was not dismantled when the O'Keefes acquired the property in 1907, but instead moved over to their home farm where it was repurposed for a different use. That's my hypothesis. My mind immediately goes back to whether the planks in the shed relate to the church instead of a barn or house of the Smiths, but that's a mystery that we've yet to solve. It has been a fascinating endeavor to weave the archaeological findings into existing narratives of the Smith and Hearst families, their farms, and the Bethel Church. Elise and I are thrilled to have had this opportunity to share this information with you, and we hope that it has demonstrated not just the value of archaeology within the local history realm, or vice versa, but also how rewarding it can be to rekindle the historical connection of communities to a place, to the people, and events upon which today's contemporary social and physical landscape has been built, so we can continue to grow those relationships in the future. That said, I hope the South Sandwich Historical Society can incorporate some of this history and our beautiful maps into their website content to more fulsomely capture the Black community foundations in the township. On that note, I'm going to pass it back to Elise for her concluding thoughts. Before I do so, I'd just like one last acknowledgement from me to say thank you to the Society once again, to thank Jane O'Keefe, who has been a big support, friend, and source of information, and to everyone who has played a role in this, no matter how big or how small.
I want to take this moment to thank Holly for being such a finite thinker and doer. Her company is the largest archaeological company in Canada, and she, as a woman, is a singular owner. We have developed a real kinship over this project. For those of you who really don't know me, my family's been in this area since 1798. Some came through the Underground Railroad, some came on their own. For 32 years, I was the curator administrator of the North American Black Historical Museum, now the Amherstburg Freedom Museum. For 34 years, I taught Black Studies at St. Clair College here in Windsor. And for a little less than 10 years, I was an executive administrator at Hotel Dieu Grace Hospital. So I just have all of these full circle processes happening. What this project has done for me is validate the history I know, the history I was told, the history that many people tried to deny, and the history that some people just don't even know about. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to be validated and to be included in putting history straight and making sure that all of our descendants receive the legacy of the multicultural, wonderful history of Essex County.
Okay, thank you, Elise, and thank you, Holly, for these great presentations. We all knew where the new hospital is going to be. We all have referred to it as the O'Keefe Farm. Well, as we've seen, there's been a lot more to it than just the O'Keefe family. And there's still more to come. Do we have any questions?
Let the lights on.
Oh, yeah, turn the lights on. Yeah.
How far below current elevation were most of the artifacts found? And is that typical, across Ontario?
So a lot of artifacts are just laying on the surface. If any land has been plowed, the plow often pulls them up and turns them up and breaks them into tiny little bits. So you can see some of them are pretty small, and that's typical in farmland. So usually we would start seeing things that are a little bit more intact when we get down to what we call subsoil. You know how the topsoil is darker and then you have that lighter soil underneath? That's where we start seeing the settlement pattern, the posts, the outlines of the buildings, any of the features that might be privies or cellars and things like that. So that's fairly typical across Ontario. If you're in an unplowed area, it's an entire, or a woodlot's entirely different scenario. But that's what's typical for farmland across Ontario.
So you would see remnants of the posts that supported the buildings in the subsoil?
In the subsoil, yeah. Usually in a farm field like that, we would only see a stain, maybe tiny little remnants of wood would be left over. But in some urban contexts, we can often get the whole post still there. So preservation can really differ depending on what happened to the property after the site was abandoned.
Thank you.
Well, you seem to be fairly excited about this project and all of that. I mean, you've done all across Canada fairly. Was this unique?
The historical significance is extremely unique, and not just on one layer. Like the Black history component is absolutely incredible. Like I tried to explain that a little bit in my presentation, but like I can name the number of Black settler sites that have been identified in Ontario archaeologically in two hands, and in this area, you know, there is a few, but it's hugely significant for that reason. But what I enjoyed most about it is the multiple layers of the history. I loved the story of the church and finding that mystery. I don't know of very many meeting houses, early churches like that have been documented archaeologically either. Just the interconnections of the families was pretty incredible to see all of that happen. There's also a significant Indigenous history in this area too, which I didn't talk too much about. So I'm very excited also because there's a lot of times we excavate sites and the descendants are not around, or you can't talk to them and you can't share the memories. So, I mean, the stories that I told tonight are from, some of the details are from sitting with Arlene and Ted and Jane and just talking through some of this. This is what I remember, or this is what my dad said, or, you know, this is what Michael O'Keefe said. So kind of trying to connect those details with what I could find in the records. And it's fascinating to do that, and then combine it with the archaeology as well. So that's what's really exciting, because we often don't, as archaeologists, get the opportunity to do all of that and contribute in such a meaningful way to the history. So.
I'd like to add that it's also exciting because of the multicultural facet of this whole project. You know, the Ure family and the Hearst family and the Little family, the Smith family and the Payne family interacted with each other over generations and supported each other over generations. This is not the story we were fed in school. And it's certainly not the story that's swirling in the world we live in today. This is a unique, precious story.
Ted, I saw your hand up earlier. I have to give you the floor.
I was just wondering, there must have been a lot of homes on that property at one time.
Yeah.
There must be upwards of 25 different homes or something?
Yeah, like, so if you look at one of the maps that I had, which is the 1877 Walling map, you can see where the houses are, right? Just on Jane's farm alone, I think there's two just on her, where around her house is, and there's probably two at least on the Paynes. I think the Hearst Little Farm has at least two houses, and some of the records suggest that there is. We haven't figured that out yet. We're still cataloging the artifacts from the Hearst Little Farm. That'll be next year's presentation, maybe.
You're going to do this every year, right?
But you're right. There's going to be multiple generations, and sometimes we find different archaeological sites. Some representing that early cabin or that very early house, and then some representing the second generation or even the third generation house on the farm.
So there must have been homes beyond where the hospital site is. They out towards the Air Force area. There had to be all over that 200 acres, I suppose.
What I'd like to add, and this is what we do, we tag team. That lot gave numerous Black families their start and included names like Walker and Hill. Edward and George Walker were escaped from Kentucky. They came here, they grew produce. They had a grocery store on McDougal Street. You heard Holly mention McDougal Street several times. They also built the Walker House, which was a Black inn and hotel, pub. And they made their whiskey in washing vats in the back of the Walker House. And as a little girl, I was told that the Walkers and the Walkers, Hiram, knew each other, and that could be where some of the whiskeys came from. George Walker in 1892 was worth $55,000. Big money. Yeah, he was a notable in Black society here in the Windsor area, but also in the United States. So that lot grew big stuff.
Wendy?
Just to extend what Elise said about the settlers, that the deep connection, and we came across Louisa's paintings where she's buried in Fairburn Cemetery on Base Line, and the Ure and O'Keefe family put her marker there. There was never a marker there for years and years and years, and on her death certificate it has Raymond O'Keefe, and it lists him as her first friend.
Yeah. Just a friend. It says just a friend.
Just a friend.
Yeah. And it says, so it didn't matter which race they were living side by side, and like Elise said, you don't hear about that in your history books too much.
I wish Jane was here too, because one of the things that she's been doing is looking at in some of the boxes of things that have been in her house, which is again a multi-generational O'Keefe family house. So when Louisa passed, Raymond inherited a lot of her stuff and a lot of her papers. And Jane was able to find one of the original deeds for one of the land purchases by the Payne family. So, yeah, pretty cool stuff.
Jean?
Given the significance that you have described of this multi-generational property and the different, groups of people that live there side by side, is there any plans to publish this story or to
Who writes books here?
make a movie, make a documentary, something like that?
Yeah, she who writes books is collaborating with Holly to look into sources of funding. That's not always so easy. We may end up kind of digging in our own back pockets. But yes, this information is so significant from so many different vantage points that I'm sure with some of the wheedling that I can do, we will find a way to publish this information. It's phenomenal.
Yes.
The harmonica reed plates really intrigue. So it's the outer part of the harmonica didn't seem to have survived, but the brass reed plates did, which is really cool. Who knows where they're from? Probably Germany, because that's where most harmonicas are still made, right? So in addition to the harmonica, or the tin sandwich as we call it, what other instruments were getting played, and what kind of music was getting played?
I can speak to what we found archaeologically. So we also have a piece of an accordion plate there, and then a mouth harp is there as well. Do you want to
Yes, I
speak
do.
to?
and I can speak to the community of it. To this day, Smith family members are very musical. James Walls, who was a retired principal from the Windsor Board of Education, is a fine musician. Other instruments being played in the area would be piano, organ. My own grandmother was a trained organist and a pianist. There were several Black family groups who would also play guitar, and they played mostly gospel music, but some of the sinners played down, you understand?
Then you had a sin.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, we were just a part of the community like everybody else. And what we contributed enriched this corner of the world. But the Smith family were extremely musical.
Well, it seems to me, in view of the opposition that that site faced, you know, as part of the selection process, and the availability of many other parcels of land that could have been chosen, it seems like this one was the product of destiny.
I can tell you that's how I feel. I feel like, so I didn't really talk about that at the beginning, but sort of since we started our company, I've worked a lot with different Black communities, from Owen Sound and Negro Creek to Toronto, downtown Toronto, all over. And I feel like everything that I learned from them, all the teachings that I had from descendants and historians and community representatives that I was working with, led me to this place, to this moment, to my friendship with Elise, to this project, in a way that we are doing this in a really positive and meaningful way, and doing it with community. So I feel like I've taken all of the teachings of those descendants with me to arrive at this moment, so that when we have an opportunity that's as wonderful as this and such a rich history, that we're doing it in the right way.
I agree with Holly 100%. When you look at this time in history, it was very tumultuous. The Irish had been coming here because of potato famine and British rule, so on and so forth. People of African origin were coming here escaping enslavement, but also as freed people escaping oppression. And no one has given us immigration status. We escaped slavery, but that's not immigration status. Yeah, you and I can carry on about this, Mel. But it's too, yeah.
Multiple sides of a, how many sides does this coin have?
It is an immigration of sorts, a huge migration of sorts. But those dignifications were not given. When they got here through the Refugee Home Society and on their own, because many of the Blacks who came here were already affluent, but with the passing of the 1850 slave law, they had to get out of the United States, or they could be walked up to on the street and claimed as someone's property, and they had no voice in the courts. So we got a huge mix that helped this Windsor-Essex County area become a real mecca, a real infusion of good monies from people who were not appreciated or dignified in their own country, and a good mix of hardworking, skilled, enslaved people who came here knowing what to do and did it well.
Ted?
I just have dad used to work with his cousin on the farm. He lived up on the 10th concession of County Road 17, and we would work up there for 3 or 4 days, then we'd come back to our place for 3 or 4 days, and we were done working on one of the pieces of land up there, and Doug said, we're moving to the Smith farm next. I said, where in the hell's the Smith farm? I never heard of it. It was part of our farm, your farm, right at the corner of the baseline
Yeah,
and the 8th concession, and you showed that piece
Yeah.
of property
yeah,
tonight.
last year.
But I had never heard of the Smith farm, so I didn't, here it was part of our farm.
Will any of these artifacts or the history of the property be incorporated in the new hospital?
So the South Sandwich Historical Society, Elise, and a number of other community organizations and representatives are all working with the hospital currently to think about what that might look like, whether it's something on site or digital or what that ends up to be. But yeah, there's a commitment to do some kind of commemoration.
You mentioned about the Smith Cemetery on Bamwell Road, and I remember back when I was part of the township and we were maintaining parks, we actually did get to go there, and I know even though the plaques are at the front, but the actual sites are back where it's pretty low the ground, and that's another part of another history. It's another history lesson.
Well, the town was very good with us, but back when it was Sandwich East, Bob Smith, Robert Smith, one of the Smith descendants, and some of the guys, I'll say, in the neighborhood, my dad being one of them, were disgusted with the overgrown, broken up, who gives the way that this property was being poorly maintained. You can partly blame that on the fact that some of the black people in the area didn't take care of these sites either. That's why I've spent over 70 years finding these abandoned spots, having them cleaned up, and having them designated municipally, provincially, and federally. And if I hadn't done that, along with a few other people, one guy by the name of Glenn Cook, who's a good friend of mine, the Smith site most probably wouldn't be there. But the town does take care of it now.
Okay, just so you know, our presentation tonight has been recorded, and we will have it uploaded to our website in the near future. So it'll be available on our YouTube channel. And I will be working with Holly over the coming weeks or years, and keep you updated on it. When she makes information available, I'll share it with everyone. That's one of the goals of our group, the Historical Society, is to share what we learn with everything, with everybody. That's one of the things we try to do, keep the community engaged. Any other questions? Sure.
You had mentioned once about privy. That's usually where I won't say the best stuff is found.
Yes, it is.
I don't know if that was the best word, but interesting stuff. You mentioned that you found the stone-lined well. Did you find any privy pits or?
We're still trying to sort that out, and I'll tell you why. A lot of privies are usually self-evident, and Barb can also speak to some of this. It wasn't immediately obvious that we had privies on any of the farms. One of the things Barb and I were talking about tonight is whether they were using bucket privies, which is they don't dig the big hole in the ground, and they use buckets, and then they would dispose of the waste, which is very different. In 2015, I excavated a major site, an early Black settlement site as well, by the courthouse in downtown Toronto, part of St. John's Ward. We had 42 privies. It was an urban neighborhood, and they were all in wood frame vaults in the ground. And they were full of artifacts. Like, I describe them as an archaeologist fantasy because you can find out so much stuff from looking in a privy. Great. But I don't think we didn't have that experience on these sites, and something else might be going on, but it might also come out in the analysis. We had some really big features that looked like there was a lot of kind of what I call post-abandonment disturbance. So after they stopped being used, that there was obviously some collapse and a lot of digging and they just weren't pretty privy pits, let's say. But that's what we do as archaeologists. We like to dig.
We dig the shit.
Yeah. to find gold. To find gold. Yeah.
What do you find in the privies?
There's a lot of stories to be told about privies. Back when there wasn't regular waste disposal, a lot of times they would throw their kitchen garbage in a privy. They would throw any kind of, any broken bottles, glass, that kind of stuff that might be dangerous to people. But a lot of people went to the privy to take medicine or to have a little sip that would, hide the evidence. So it goes down in the privy pit because nobody wants to dig that stuff. So sometimes, we get a lot of coins and things that might have fallen out of pockets. There's lots of fun stories that archaeologists have told from what they found in those privy pits.
In Holly's book about the property in Toronto, one of the privies had cosmetics in them. Women were supposed to be beautiful without all of that stuff, and maybe mom and dad didn't want little Sarah wearing that lipstick or rouge, and it was an interesting find.
It's the book I'm talking about is called The Ward Uncovered. If anybody wants one, just ask me. The archaeology of everyday life. What's fun in the privy pits too is all the kind of the micro level things that you don't see. So it's a lot of kitchen waste is deposited, a lot of human waste is deposited. So we can do a really technical and fine scale analysis of that soil and use that to reconstruct people's health. We can figure out what parasites they might have had, if they were suffering from any conditions. We can reconstruct diet. There's all kinds of things that you can do from the analysis of night soils, if you're so inclined. So it's fun. But let me tell you, digging 42 privies in the city of Toronto and transporting that back and forth in my van over the course of a year, I had to kindly let that van go. Because even though I got it shampooed multiple times, when something got a little damp, in the wintertime, that smell never goes away.
It's now a used vehicle.
Yeah, so.
Kevin, thank you all.
Thank you all for coming. Feel free to stick around, peruse the artifacts, go through the books. If you so desire, there's the members lounge. If you want to stay for a drink or so, I'll probably stay for a bit. Feel free to come and talk to us.